This is the members of the Continuing Legislative Committee on State Planning and Development. We have a presentation before us from OPM. Then the secretary leading this for us. I believe, Martin, you have 5 speakers, so I'm going to have you bring them in as you feel. And I will turn it over to you for a presentation to the committee.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'll just first introduce who's with me, as they will kind of take over after I kind of bring introduction to all of you of the plan. With me today from the Office of Responsible Growth is our Assistant Director, Dan Morley. And we also have our 3 environmental analysts, Bruce Witchen, Eric Lindquist, and Matthew Pafford. So they are joining me today from the Office of Policy and Management. I should also just identify myself for the record. Martin Heft, Under Secretary for the Intergovernmental Policy and Planning Division. So good afternoon, Senators, Representatives. We thank you for convening another public hearing on the draft conservation and development policies. The plan for Connecticut 2018-2023 will be referred to as the draft C&D plan. I do want to note as an interesting point that exactly 1 year ago today, we were presenting before you on February 16th of 21. So kind of a little ironic there. I did not go back the other 4 years to check dates, but
this is the 5th year.
Correct. This is the 5th consecutive year that OPM has submitted the draft state C&D plan for the General Assembly's consideration of adoption. Last year, as you know, the public hearing was held. A resolution and a bill to postpone the start of the next plan by 1 year were passed by the House, but unfortunately no action was taken on in the Senate. The next steps and the path forward solely reside with the continuing committee under Connecticut General Statute Section 16A-30. OPM does recognize that the newly formed Commission on Connecticut's Development in the Future, established under Section 13 of Public Act 2129, is tasked with evaluating policies related to land use, conservation, housing affordability, and infrastructure. There is a work group co-chaired by our wonderful state rep, McCarthy Vahey, on state and municipal plans, which includes the process of adopting this plan. We believe that the outcome of the commission's work and any resulting legislation will set the course for the next state C&D plan. As always, my staff is available to assist you along the way. I'm now going to ask Dan Morley and the rest of the team to provide a summary overview of the draft C&D plan, really high level, just a real brief few slides, and then we'll be available to answer any questions that arise. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you, and I know you're going to pop up a PowerPoint.
Yep. Okay. So thank you, Martin, and thank you. I appreciate the time today before you. Senator Cassano, Representative McCarthy Vahey, and members of the continuing committee. My name is Dan Morley. I'm the Assistant Director for the Intergovernmental Policy Division at OPM. And as Martin indicated, we're going to make our presentation a little briefer this year. Erica, if I may, share my screen. I'll bring up the PowerPoint presentation.
You should be able to share your screen. Let me know if you can't.
Okay. Okay. So you're not seeing it yet, are you?
I can see it.
I can see it.
Okay.
You can see it, Dan.
Okay. All right. Very good. So as Martin mentioned, you can see the date on there. It's 1 year ago yesterday. We did not update this presentation as nothing has effectively changed. What I do want to reiterate is that this whole process, while it is administered by OPM, it's really OPM acting as the continuing committee's agent. We're basically your staff in this process. General Statute 4-60D, which establishes the continuing committee, states that the committee's role is to establish broad goals and objectives for the physical and economic development of the state and transmit those goals and objectives to the OPM secretary. So that is really what initiates the process and is effectively the committee's oversight role while the plan is in effect. So this graphic here shows really what OPM's role is once we take the ball from you. We have a process that's outlined in statute that I'm going to get into, but our role is really to effectively communicate what it is we're trying to, those goals and objectives that have transmitted from you, how it is we're going to implement them. So our goal is, or our job is to work with our sister agencies, as well as municipalities and the regional councils of governments that they belong to, in coordinating early informal communication, as well as formal public hearings, and just feedback, response to comments along the way. The formal process in statute requires OPM to produce 3 separate drafts, of which the continuing committee is kept in the loop on until that final draft, which then the continuing committee is charged with shepherding through the General Assembly's adoption process. And today we're here at the legislative public hearing, which is near the end of that process. So just to give you the timeline, you can ignore, as far as looking forward, this is basically the setup that we'll be looking at for when we do the following state plan. But for your own purposes, I just wanted to reiterate that it's been a while since we began this process. Much has changed since then, but the public outreach that we began with was in 2016. That's when we convened agencies and some initial public meetings with municipalities through the councils of governments. That resulted in a draft plan that we submitted to the continuing committee in September of 2016. We then tidied up that plan a bit and resubmitted it that next spring, which then required 5 months of public hearings, which we did across the state at each one of the councils. And then following that, we responded to all the public comments received and provided the committee with a final draft plan, or at least a revised draft plan, I should say, that then the committee has since tried shepherding through the legislative process in each year since 2018. So again, that's the overview of the timeline that's in statute and how we're sort of on this merry-go-round right now, unable to get off until the plan is adopted or the legislation is somehow amended. The state C&D plan is implemented by state agencies. Many people refer to it as OPM's plan, but it really is the General Assembly's plan, and the role of state agencies is to implement it as was deemed approved by the General Assembly. So the primary statute regarding implementation of the plan is in 16A-31, and there's a few different sections. The primary one is this, subsection A, which relates to any time a state agency authorizes grants or undertakes any of these actions using $200,000 in state or federal funds to either acquire real property, develop or improve real property, or to acquire public transportation equipment or facilities, that's when the plan applies. So anything that an agency does in that realm, they are to basically make a determination as to why their action is deemed consistent with the policies of the plan. The other requirements with regard to implementation do involve OPM, but our role is really at the back end. So for example, when an agency has to make this determination of consistency on any particular action, they have the right, in fact, they are required to request of OPM an advisory statement. And then obviously upon any receipt of an advisory statement, OPM will provide its guidance. Also OPM is required to provide an advisory statement to the bond commission with regard to the extent to which items on each bond agenda are consistent with the state C&D plan. And finally, there's numerous areas in state statute that require state agencies to develop various topical plans. And all of those must be submitted to OPM, for a review of consistency with the state C&D plan. So we basically attack implementation at the planning level and at the funding level. So that kind of gives the broad overview. Based on conversations with Representative McCarthy-Vahey, our goal today was to make this presentation short. So I'm going to end it here. We're not going to delve into the details of the implementation and the map and so forth, unless you are looking for any specific input on that. So I'm going to leave it at that now. As Martin indicated, my staff, Bruce Witchin, Matt Pafford, and Eric Lindquist are here. If I'm unable to answer any questions, we have plenty of support to hopefully answer anything you might have today. Thank you.
Martin?
Sure, Senator Cassano, I don't know if you want me to call on the people or.
Yeah, why don't you?
That,
Yeah.
You let me know which preference, since it's your meeting.
Why don't you, it's your staff and you've got it set up, so why don't you proceed?
Okay, terrific, thank you. And obviously, I think everyone's aware of using the raised hand feature, because then I'll be able to identify you. So Representative Rojas, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, OPM, Dan, and Martin, for the presentation. I probably ask this question every time, but on that last slide where it directs state agencies to do certain things if there's going to be a project, I mean, to what extent, actually I have the PowerPoint up myself too, so I can go back to it. So, I mean, you know, when it talks about an advisory opinion, where is that opinion reflected so that we would actually see it?
Sure. Dan?
So, very good question, actually, and it's timely because just yesterday OPM submitted its annual report on the implementation, and that actually, if you do have a chance, it gives a good history of where we're at. So to answer your question directly, we have made attempts over the previous 4 legislative sessions to introduce legislation that would actually make sure that there was something on record as to an advisory report. But we did not want to have agencies hamstrung by the current nature of the law, which is the law actually says agencies shall seek an advisory opinion on everything. And we recognize that with routine actions of state agencies, they would be overwhelmed, OPM would be overwhelmed. What our legislative proposals have done in the prior years was to seek a balance. And what we had requested or proposed doing was to tie in an existing public process, which it's known as the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act. And anytime an agency undertakes what's called an action which may significantly affect the environment, so basically a larger style project that does have the potential to impact the environment as well as socioeconomic aspects of the surrounding area, we thought those are the opportunities, you know, those are the ones that catch the public's, you know, catch their, you know, their interest. So we wanted to tie that process in, so to say that anytime an agency triggers Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, which requires public scoping, we believe that it was appropriate to require them to request the advisory opinion on state C&D plan consistency prior to that going public. So the public notice would include effectively OPM's consistency statement. This is why we're doing the project. I've always looked at it as our job is to explain why the state is using taxpayers' dollars to do something. And then the SEPA process, Environmental Policy Act, says, well, here's how we can do it. You can look at alternatives and so forth. So what we're trying to do is to marry those two sections of statute. the State C&D Plan and the Environmental Policy Act. And again, it was to balance that the ability for state agencies to actually adhere to, I think, what was the intent of state law, which is to explain, advisory statements as to why we do certain things that we do. As I said, we can't do it for all the routine things. That would just be pushing paper. But for projects that are unique or of a larger scale, we thought it was appropriate. Unfortunately, none of those proposals in the last 4 years passed. And we kind of punted this year and did not resubmit because with the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future going forward, I think it's a great area for discussion. If there's a better idea on how to do it, I think we'd love to be part of that discussion. But anyways, the annual report that was submitted yesterday does give the background, and hopefully we'll answer any other questions you might have.
And does that address the question about bond commission agenda items too? Because I know obviously we don't want to gum up the gears entirely of growing our state and investing in, in much needed projects. At the same time, there's always this tension about we don't want to completely overdevelop our rural areas and cut down more woods. And I'm just wondering, to what extent are we actually holding ourselves accountable, particularly state agencies, via bond commission authorizations in terms of when projects get built? And I know there's obviously this policy to try to keep us in a good direction, but then there's the politics of requesting a bond commission or a bond request, right? And the governor and OPM agreeing to that bond request, whether it's a legislator, whether who it is, and kind of how do we balance? Are we really balancing those two, or should it be? Yeah, I guess balancing the desire to be strict and follow what we have in law versus this other kind of priority that we have to not completely overdevelop our state either. So I don't even know if that makes sense at all, because I might be confusing myself at this point, but that was kind of my reaction to seeing that listed again, right? Again, I served on the bond commission. I don't know that I ever saw an advisory statement commenting on to the extent to which a bond commission agenda item conforms to the C&D plan, or maybe I just missed it. But.
Yeah, so Representative, actually, Matthew Pafford actually prepares that whenever we have a bond commission meeting, does that review for, consistency with that. So that is done and provided to, the secretary and the bond commission for that during that process.
So is it in the bond commission packets? I mean, I've read the packets before. I just don't remember seeing something to this effect.
I honestly, I could get back to you. I don't know if it's included in the bond commission package. I know it's not normally in the agenda packet that goes out, but I'm sure, because all the backup material isn't necessarily in the agenda packet, but I'm not sure what else gets distributed to the bond commission, but we could follow up on that for you.
Right, because I mean, if it's not included, then who knows about it other than perhaps the secretary, right?
Yep, definitely. Thank you, Representative. Believe Senator McCrory, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so this is relatively newly made. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So explain to me in an ideal world, how would the process work if the state was going to utilize some land for X development, whatever the case may be? How would this advisory committee or this committee, how will it get its message out, its point out, or information out on a particular project? So ideally, how would this process work? I guess that's my question.
Okay, so once, with the plan adopted, there, kind of two separate pieces. One is once the plan's adopted, then it's the implementation process. So I think you're asking, if I can just clarify, Senator, that looking about kind of the implementation process, what happens from, whether it's coming from a grant bond commission piece for a particular project through an agency. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for example, I just say someone wants to build Amazon want to come in and build a 150,000 square foot site facility. How will that work when it comes to land use and all those good things? Ideally, how does the process normally works?
Sure. Dan or Matt, do you want to kind of go through that? And then also want to just clarify about the state plan of how it reflects, if it's a local municipality, it's, different than, the state side.
Right. Yeah. So let me kind of do a broad overview and then come back to the specific question. And we'll refer to the question with regard to it's a private development that's seeking some form of state assistance. I think that's getting to Senator McCrory's question. So, broadly speaking, the committee's role, again, kind of, I don't want to say it never ends. The purpose here today is to approve a plan that's prepared on a 5-year cycle. So the committee's first role is to kind of signal to OPM, what it is we should be looking at as far as new turf to overturn, turn over this year, and then we go forth and develop a plan to do so. And hopefully, if that gets approved through the General Assembly process, the continuing committee steps back at that point, and you become more of the overseer of the plan during its 5 years that it's been under approval for. So during that 5-year period, you would certainly, the committee would be reviewing annual reports on implementation. That should give you an idea of how well the executive branch is doing in fulfilling its obligation, but also anything new that comes up, whether it be through legislation that might relate to conservation and development policies or whatnot, could be addressed through something called the interim change process.
Okay.
So whereas the full General Assembly has to adopt the C&D plan once every 5 years, the continuing committee has the ability to approve interim changes within that 5-year period on its own. And again, OPM acts as staff to help in that process. Oftentimes, those interim changes either can be initiated by OPM, through a state executive branch interest. It could be through a constituent of any one of yours, or any member of the General Assembly, or particularly a type of scenario, Senator McCrory, that you just mentioned, where you maybe have a private developer seeking state assistance, and that project may not be exactly a state priority.
Right.
That's where, if there was a need, if there was an unwillingness, if you will, for a state agency to entertain such a proposal, the continuing committee could involve itself. If it was for a matter of inconsistency with the state policies, the committee could intervene as well and help resolve any roadblocks through dialogue with the appropriate agency and the parties.
Guys, so my quick question, my mom. So we're here to develop the 5-year plan. Are we at that? We're trying to develop the 5-year plan, or are we continuing it? This is a continuation of the 5-year plan that's already out there.
So the plan was developed. The 5-year plan was developed and presented to the committee in 2018. So unfortunately, it just didn't get approved in any of the recent years. So I believe the co-chairs of your committee can explain as to, the intent is to still adopt it, even though we're well along in the 5-year cycle.
So we're going to adopt something that only has 1 year left?
Yes.
Ahead,
That's the time period that the plan was developed for, but the law says that it basically will remain in effect until a new plan is adopted by the General Assembly. So just for example, the plan that was approved in 2013 was supposed to go into 2018, but because a new one hasn't been adopted, we're basically still working under the 2013 to 2018 plan.
So Representative Representative McCarty-Bathy, how come? Why is it difficult to get these plans adopted or not passed? This is my first time. What's going on here? Why is it so difficult? I mean, somebody just tell me. I don't know.
I think probably that would be more for us to answer. And the reality is that we have passed it through the committee each year, but it never gets called in the final session in either the House or the Senate. And so it sits and dies. And this is the last year. I can't imagine what happens next year if the 5 years is up and we're still using a plan that was 5 years old. So it's probably as much my responsibility to get the Senate to put it forward on the table as any other bill. But this has just gone too far, quite honestly.
Is it controversial? I mean, my question is, is it controversial? I mean, we're talking about almost 10 years since we did anything.
So it's okay, Senator, if I may,
Yes.
This might be a discussion for your meeting following the public hearing on the plan itself that I may suggest, because it's going to, where you'll be able to all talk about, the process and where you want to move forward with. So I would recommend that you hold that conversation until then and let the public hearing just on the plan itself, we can complete that. And we're happy to stay on for that meeting to answer any of those questions during your meeting portion, if that's amenable to you, Senator.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Chair McCarthy-Vahey, you had a comment or a question?
No, Senator, I concur with Mr. Heft, and I'm happy to wait for discussion during our
Thank you.
meeting. I know once we conclude the hearing, we'll be immediately followed by a meeting and we'll have some conversation. But if I may, Senator Cassano, just to say thank you. I know Groundhog Day was a couple of weeks ago, but we're celebrating it again here today. So I look forward to the conversation during our committee voting portion to talk more about what Senator McCrory just brought up.
Terrific.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Cassano, I do not see any other hands raised, but I'll ask if anyone else has any questions on the plan itself. Before I'll turn it back over to you, Senator Cassano, I will thank everyone, and obviously we'll be more than happy to stay on for your meeting to be able to provide any other input that you may have on process or anything.
Are there any members of the committee that have additional questions? Seeing none, we need to follow this up with a public hearing. This is the public hearing, obviously. So if there are no others that are looking to speak at this time, is there any member of the public that is on this that would like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Senator Cassano. I'm John Guskowski from representing the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. We registered to testify, but I don't want to jump. I don't want to jump my place in line.
No, this is perfect timing, John. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Senator and Representative McCarthy-Vahey, for allowing us to speak. It's good to be back among friends in this unfortunately intimate Zoom meeting. It would be nice to have more attention on this issue. But so for the record, my name is John Guskowski. I am a professional planner, have been a practicing planner for over 20 years in the state of Connecticut, and am co-chair of the Government Relations Committee of the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. We represent over 400 practicing planners, zoning officers, attorneys, landscape architects, and allied folks who are concerned about planning for a positive future for Connecticut. We have submitted written testimony, and hopefully people have gotten a chance to look at that. I'll try not to rehash too much what we submitted. Our take on the plan as it stands right now is obviously it's long overdue for passage, which is not something that is a surprise to either this committee or the OPM, who worked hard to prepare it. When it was basically started to be rewritten in 2016 or so. So we're 6 years into the envisioning of this plan, and which wasn't fundamentally different from the 2013 plan, particularly in terms of its 6 growth management principles, which I think are still broadly applicable. But there's a lot that has happened in the last 6 years, and even in the last 3, where we've had excellent work by Circa and some other groups on climate change. We've had a lot of social attention to social issues with the Black Lives Matter movement, social equity, looking at issues of affordable housing, and climate resilience and overall sustainability. And a number of those things are, I think, sort of touched on or mentioned in the current draft of the plan. But I think certainly since it the drafting of this current version started, a lot of these issues have taken on, I think, deservedly a lot more importance as topics for the Connecticut. So I think it would be important for OPM, and I think particularly the new Commission on Development of Connecticut's Future, to really re-envision what growth management principles and sort of guiding principles for the state's future ought to be. But in the short term, I think we're all ready to have this approved. That the plan is basically fine for now. Let's get it approved, and sort of redouble our efforts, in coordination with OPM and the big commission on development of Connecticut's future, to come up with a better process and a more meaningful document that will guide the state's growth, that will do a better job of coordinating state action, and put the role of planning in a more deservedly forward-looking spot. So we would encourage this continuing committee to quickly move this along, and encourage your colleagues in the General Assembly as a whole to pass this, so we can get some value out of it in the 1 year remaining, and sort of move together into the future. So thank you very much for your attention and your focus on this issue.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your comments. Even if it hasn't been done, it's still there and it needs to be approved. And I think it's probably the lead off into getting a 5-year plan approved next year instead of a 1-year plan. Representative Lamar, you had a question? Okay. Anyone else? Any questions for OPM? All right, seeing none, it is a public hearing. Is there anyone waiting to speak that's not a member, that hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Public hearing? I see no response. Well, seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn the committee meeting? It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Appreciate your cooperation and your patience. Stay safe.
And Senator Cassano, need to now go to our committee meeting.
Right.
So then I believe Madam Clerk needs a couple minutes to switch.
Yes, if we could take about a 5-minute break between the public hearing and the committee meeting. I just need everyone who's currently on your Zoom link, you can stay. I just need to do a few background things. So to switch it over between the public hearing and the committee meeting. So just give me a
I know we're in good hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin, thank you again and your staff.